Thank you very much. Now we've got item 14, which is the petition by Alejandro Fernandez Lorenzo, Spanish national, on behalf of the public campaign on change.org on renewable energy tax, a tax on renewable energies. We have Mr. Holprop for the petitioners. The floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Honourable members. First of all, I would like to express thanks on my behalf and on behalf of the 45,000 people who signed this petition through the change.org platform. So thanks for having dealt with our petition on the obstacles to electricity self-sufficiency in Spain and dealing with this problem here in the Parliament. I'd just like to give you a brief introduction to the situation that we are denouncing. Self-sufficiency, as you know, is about producing energy at source for personal consumption. And there are different ways of doing this. There's self-sufficiency without contributing to the grid, there's self-sufficiency with support from the grid, and there's self-sufficiency with a net balance. And the main technology used for self-sufficiency in electricity is photovoltaic solar power. And the benefits related to developing this kind of self-sufficiency are numerous. For example, you can make a saving on your electricity bill. If you're self-sufficient, you can reduce energy dependency on fossil fuels, and you can reduce GHG emissions, which are associated with electricity production. Spain has huge potential when it comes to photovoltaic self-sufficiency, largely because of high levels of solar radiation, but also because of the high price of electricity for end users. In addition, photovoltaic self-sufficiency has the potential to generate thousands of jobs in a country which has been really hard hit by the economic crisis, without incurring extra costs either for the state or the electricity system, the grid. Now, as you know, self-sufficiency using renewable energies has actually been enshrined both in the Renewables Directive and also in the Energy Efficiency Directive. And despite the long list of economic advantages and social and environmental advantages of this, the Spanish government is setting a whole series of obstacles in the way of the development of electricity self-sufficiency. And here I'm going to mention just 3 of them. First of all, regulatory uncertainty that exists in this sector in Spain. This activity is suffering from piecemeal regulation and legislation and a legal vacuum. And sometimes this hole is plugged with autonomous legislation, but in July 2013, a royal decree was proposed, and it was put through the emergency or urgency procedure, even though it had an unfavourable opinion from the advisory bodies consulted. But at the end of the day, it wasn't actually adopted. And this legal vacuum has meant that the whole idea, the whole activity of self-sufficiency is now paralysed. The second problem is the threat in this royal decree of a backup tax being levelled for self-sufficiency users who are connected to the grid, which would mean that they would lose half of their savings if they were domestic consumers, and between 20 and 30% of the potential savings if you're an industrial user or a service user. And obviously this is creating huge problems for developing the activity of self-sufficiency. And this tax, it is argued, is necessary because you have to compensate the electricity power plants for the support that they provide at times when solar power is no longer able to generate electricity. However, this support is already being paid for today using a special payment system, per capacity payment system, for the thermal plants and combined cycle power plants, which provide extra backup for the system. and that also means that there is power available to all consumers at all times, irrespective of the kind of consumer you are. Now, in addition to this, there's also a fear within the government that this activity of self-sufficiency would somehow bring down energy consumption through the grid and also therefore bring down revenues. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because self-sufficiency significantly reduces the maintenance cost for the distribution network, the grid, because there is a reduction in energy transmission, but also there's a reduction in energy losses that are incurred through transport. And at the moment, those costs are actually borne entirely by consumers, which means they're actually paying about 10 to 15% more than they should be as end users. Now, the third measure, which has perhaps gone unnoticed more than the others, but which is nevertheless very damaging for self-sufficiency, concerns the increase in the fixed part of your electricity bill and the reduction in the variable part of your electricity bill, which means that the incentives, the economic incentives for using less energy from the grid are disappearing, and that is if you're self-sufficient or if you're trying to be more energy efficient. So for all of these reasons, I'm asking this committee to open an investigation into these obstacles that the Spanish government is placing in the way of energy self-sufficiency, and I'm formally asking the European Commission to open an infringement procedure against Spain. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne. Teraz by som si dovolil požiadať o stanovisko Európsku komisiu.
Thank you very much. The Commission, which is, I think, Margaret Georgievich today. For the Commission, please.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I would first of all like to say that EU legislation does actually not contain specific provisions on self-consumption. However, the Commission is of the opinion that self-consumption is a very important tool in order to reach the EU climate and energy goals, in particular the targets concerning 2020 for energy efficiency, renewable energy and greenhouse gas emission savings, but also in the 2030 perspective. The Commission understands that the petitioner is concerned about mainly three obstacles to self-consumption in Spain. Firstly, the petitioner is concerned about the regulatory uncertainty in this area in Spain, and the Commission can only agree that the regulatory uncertainty that is currently in place is potentially hampering self-consumption in Spain. But since EU regulation at the moment does not regulate or harmonize self-consumption conditions in the EU, the Commission can only urge the Spanish government to take actions in order to remove this uncertainty. Secondly, the petitioner is concerned about the proposed measures concerning charges for self-consumption envisaged in the draft decree law or royal decree of July 2013. As far as the Commission is aware, these measures have still not been approved. The Commission is only able to complete its assessment of the legal compatibility of any such measures once they have been adopted. It can only thereafter consider EU actions, whether EU actions is appropriate or necessary. Finally, the petitioner is concerned about an increase in the fixed components and a reduction in the variable components of the electricity invoice. According to the petitioner, this removes the economic incentives to consume less energy. The Commission believes that this aspect very well can be a part of a Commission potential assessment of the legality of self-consumption measures in Spain. However, as a separate issue, the Commission would really like to ask the petitioner for further information about the impact of this measure for self-consumption. So, in conclusion, while the EU legislation does not contain specific provisions on self-consumption, in view of the importance of self-consumption in order to reach the EU climate and energy objectives, the Commission is ready to analyse under EU law, including under the Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Internal Energy Market rules, any measures adopted by Spain that could potentially hamper the development of self-consumption. And this would also take into consideration, of course, any further information from the petitioner concerning the effect of the reform on the fixed and variable components of the electricity invoice. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne. O slovo sa požiadal pán...
Thank you very much. Mrs. Auken, please, wants to speak.
Just briefly, I have many of my Spanish colleagues here more informed of what's going on, but I just want to put one question to the Commission or perhaps to the petitioners, because, you know, we have in Denmark had discussions if you produce electricity yourself from especially this pumps and how you can do it, and sun cells. Then many of our producers use the net as a backup. They can send the surplus of electricity back to the net, and they can get the cost covered. And there it could seem natural that they are also paying a part of the costs for the net. But as far as I can see here, it's not, has nothing to do with that. They're just taking money in order to help coal industry. And that sounds dramatic and corrupt.
Ďakujem pekne. Pán Albiol.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Albiol.
Gracias. Bueno,
Thank you. Well, the Spanish PP government has attacked the renewables sector, and they're trying to dismantle a whole network of self-consumption, which could damage the big companies and energy companies and their bottom line. The law on the electricity sector has meant that you cannot produce your own energy anymore because there are a whole series of obstacles, economic and administrative problems in the way, and there are also sanctions in the pipeline as well. And then in 2013 there was a reduction of 1 billion euros, and in 2014 another reduction in the investment in renewables, and with that you can see there's a clear political line to change the tax on renewable energies in Spain. So they're not promoting renewables, they're actually now focusing on things like fracking, which are extremely aggressive energy recovery systems. So we want there to be more democracy and a democratization of the energy sector in Spain. In Spain, we've got 16.6% of people who are facing energy poverty. And now you're attacking renewables as well, which has meant a loss of 20,000 jobs in places like in Valencia. People are talking about having lost 57% of jobs in the energy sector. So obviously I support this petition. The governments are legislating in favour of the big energy companies and then condemning 7 million people to energy poverty in Spain. And obviously, given that situation, you know, we have to do something about this. There's only an ideological argument that's missing here, but then you're really just thinking about the retirement prospects for older politicians, because there's the issue of the revolving door, of course. Mr. Aznar, who is now working for Endesa, he was the Prime Minister once. Mr. Zapatero, who was also working for Endesa. Felipe González is working for Gas Natural. And, other leaders have all ended up in big energy company posts as well. So perhaps the government is actually more interested in private interests than other things. And Mr. Cañete, when it comes to revolving doors, went the other way around. He went from his oil company job to his energy portfolio in the government. So that's really just to explain what the situation is in the energy sector in Spain today. Now, we fully support this petition. We believe that there should be an investigation opened into these obstacles that are being created for people who are interested in self-consumption and developing this activity for renewable energies. And we think that there's also a justification for the infringement proceeding as well, because we've talked about this regulatory uncertainty. And then there's the issue of the increase in the fixed component of invoices and the reduction of the variable component of invoices, and that's running counter to European legislation. So we think this petition should remain open, and we think we should continue supporting the petitioner. Thank you.
Pekne, pani Cabezón Ruiz, prego.
Thank you, Mrs. Cabezón.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Well, there has been an important reform in this sector in Spain, but we've got limbo and legal vacuums now, and there's been a real backpedaling for some people, particularly when it comes to the renewable sector. But self-consumption today is really seriously threatened by this possible tax, which would stop it working altogether. So I fully support the petitioners. You know, they're all already paying for these costs, and we shouldn't need to have any kind of extra backup tax, because actually it would be just to compensate the energy companies. Things have already been paid for enough, so I don't think we should have this extra tax, and we shouldn't be talking about contributing to the grid anymore. What we need is democratization of the energy sector and fair investment to be able to combat energy poverty as a whole. I also think we should maintain the petition open, and we should continue working on this as the Commission has suggested. And I'd also like to thank the Commission at the moment for having flagged up the importance of the 2020-2030 objectives when it comes to energy, and we should clarify all of the uncertainty that prevails here and deal with the invoicing problem first and foremost. So I'd like to also express my thanks for the way this has been dealt with, because the Commission has really used its expertise here to look into the issue. That doesn't always happen, but it has here. So I'd really like to thank the Commission for its work, and I also want to say that I really think we should keep this petition open, because as we've heard, we're creating an energy union, but there are legal vacuums, and this is a problem for consumers and users, but also people interested in self-consumption. So I think all of us should work together and make sure that this energy union works, and the energy model that we're developing for Europe works and is probably integrated and doesn't just work in favour of the big energy companies or promote or champion one particular energy over others. I think that's very important when it comes to research and development and our consumers. So I'd like to thank the petitioners for having raised this extremely important issue at a time when things are so tough for our citizens. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne. Pani Sebastia.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sebastian.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd just like to state that the problem that we face is absolutely a European one. Firstly, because there are millions of European citizens from across Europe in Spain who are facing this problem of legal uncertainty, and that's not something that we can allow to happen. Also, this legal insecurity threatens those who want to produce their own form of sustainable electricity, and it also provides an obstacle to the change that we want to see in terms of energy production across Europe. And let's not forget that that's one of the objectives that the European Union has set out for the very near future. The citizens of Europe have to be made responsible for this change. They have to be brought on board. Quite often we assume and we work on the basis that citizens have to be involved, and here there's an obstacle to that. The companies involved can impose a distribution system, and let's not forget that this is funded publicly, on the citizens, whether it's manufacturing or producing or distributing the energy. Also, when it comes to the structure of markets and competition, the government in Spain has put obstacles in place to self-consumption, and this is something that works against the very principles of competition, and that is one of the guiding principles of the markets we want to create in Europe. So, in the light of the petitions that have been submitted, if we allow a precedent to be set up in the European Union where a member state can act in such a way as to impede self-consumption, to stop consumers producing clean and eco-friendly energy for their own consumption, then we are creating a terrible precedent for Europe and undermining and jeopardizing these European objectives. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne. Teraz pani kolegyňa Estaras Ferragut.
Mrs. Esteras.
Gracias.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to say that this petition should be kept open, and I think that based on the information that's been given to us by the Commission and based on the new information brought to us by the petitioner, we should keep investigating this issue. In Spain, the information that we have is that following the approval given on the 23rd of December 2013, electrical energy can be produced by citizens, and according to the Spanish government, they are currently working on implementing the European framework so that they can ensure that the various different forms of self-consumption can be applied fully, and that will add to the sustainability of the system. Now, with that new legislative framework, people interested in self-consumption can contribute to the sustainability of the electrical network itself. And although it's very clear that the measures haven't been implemented to the full yet, it is important to note that the 2020 objectives are at stake in this application. At the moment, the Spanish government is working towards implementing those legislative frameworks because it is part of the objectives, and also they're working on renewable energies. But I would put my faith in the Commission investigating and making sure that the Spanish government is meeting those requirements, because it's part of all of our objectives. So I would keep this petition open. We'll see what the Spanish government does, and then we can close it.
Ďakujem pekne. Pani Terry Cabras.
Thank you very much. Mr. Terry Cabras.
Merci.
Thank you. I'd just like to speak in favour of this petition and perhaps add a couple of points to what colleagues have said. I think that the Spanish government's general policy has to be taken into consideration. It gives priority to large companies, and it gives them the right to claim levies and fees for the maintenance of the structure. And I don't think the Spanish government's policy here goes along the same lines as European legislation in the field of energy objectives. The first point I'd like to address is that Spanish energy is the most expensive energy in Europe. That's the first point. Secondly, it seems to me that it would be interesting to compare with Sweden. For example, renewable energy doesn't just depend on wind power. There are plenty of other forms, for example, solar energy. It's important to note that in Sweden, more than 50% of energy is provided by renewable sources, whereas that figure for Spain is 14%. So the renewable energy in Spain, despite the vast abundance of solar energy, is still scarce compared to Nordic countries. Thank you.
Urtasun.
Thank you very much, Mr. Urtasun.
Muy brevemente, simplemente.
Yes, very briefly, I just wanted to thank the petitioners for being here. I'd like to thank the around 50,000 people who signed this petition, making it possible to bring this petition here. I'd also like to call upon the European Commission to analyse the data in detail. Based on the evidence that we've heard, we can deduce that the current legislative framework has to be brought into line with European directives, because it seems to me that there are flagrant breaches of European legislation, and once again it's important for the Commission to investigate the whole of Spanish energy policy from a point of view of competition, because it seems that there is a flagrant breach of the electrical market. And of course the electrical market is just a part of it. There's a lot more besides. But thank you very much to the petitioner for the information they've brought, and all of those members who want to bring renewable energies to Europe have to work to try to get the Spanish government to change its policy because renewable energies have suffered for many years in Spain. Thank you, Ms. Becerra.
Bueno, para cerrar, mis compañeros.
Well, my colleagues have already expressed a great deal of the points that I wanted to bring up. But first and foremost, I'd like to thank the petitioner. I'd like to remind everybody just how important it is for civil society and non-governmental organisations such as Change to get involved here so that citizens can be politically active. We are elected as politicians, but it's important for citizens to come forward to denounce the issues that have to be denounced. My main conclusion would be to express support for the Commission representative in what they've said. It's very important for the legal measures to be formally adopted in Spain, and the Commission is now going to assess whether or not Spanish legislation is in line with European legislation. It seems probable or fairly clear that the levies that are being brought to consumers go against European legislation because they go against the supply of renewable and self-sustainable energy sources, and that counts against Europe. Putting obstacles in place of this specific objective, particularly when it's being entered into voluntarily by citizens, is something that cannot be in the spirit of European legislation. Not to go on at great length, there's just one point I'd like to bring in, which is that the key to developing sustainable energy policy in Europe is going to be dealing with what's happening in countries such as Spain. It's quite clear that there is a political setup which protects several large vested economic interests in the energy sector, and that's not something that we can allow to proliferate or prevail. European energy policy has to keep promoting renewable sources of energy production within the framework of efficiency, reducing emissions, and we have to be very, very strict in making sure that these regulations set out at European level are complied with. And to conclude, of course, I believe that this petition should be kept open while the Commission is completing its work, and in order for the Commission to conclude its work, I think Spain also needs to do its homework and legislate, taking into account the needs of the citizens. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne. Zdá sa, že je tu konsenzus v tom, že...
Thank you very much. It seems that there is now a consensus on this petition, which comes into the category of consumer protection. We greatly appreciate the work of the Commission in this area. I think that there are basically two wishes. Firstly, further communication with the petitioners in order to elicit more information about the economic side of this. And then secondly, the Commission intends to keep up the contact with the Spanish authorities. And I think that we can certainly help in both of those objectives by keeping this open. We will ask the Spanish authorities to take a position and set out what their plans are for future activity in this area. And then, on the basis of responses obtained, we can then continue our work. This takes us